I read his biography recently. Brando wrote an excellent book. I wanted to make this video inspired by his book, Songs My Mother Taught Me. Brando's mother taught him songs from various languages and cultures.
My mother knew all the songs in the world. I remember the music and lyrics of thousands of songs my mother taught me. I know African songs, Chinese songs, Tahitian songs, French songs, German songs, and of course all the songs my mother taught me. There is hardly a culture whose music I don't recognize. Oddly enough, I don't remember a single song written after the 1970s.
Of course, the evolution of an artist should be made by people who understand that art, who have worked in that art, and who have grasped the philosophical, historical, and theoretical knowledge required to understand that art. I'm not here to pontificate on Marlon Brando's acting, even though I'm a cinephile. This is out of my league. But as a fan of Brando, I wanted to tell you about him from my point of view. I'm a fan of two names in American cinema, Marlon Brando and Sean Penn. I will make a video about Sean Penn later, but I want to tell you about Brando from my perspective. Two elements make an artist an artist. One is his skill and knowledge of his art. However, another point is at least as necessary, which puts the artist in a completely different position. The second element is not submitting to authority. It is not to submit. It is to know that the stereotypes of society feed the power, and to see that this power has exploited the masses and nature throughout the history of civilization.
We just came from Bobby Hutton's funeral, and I'm not going to stand up here and make a speech because white people, you've been listening to white people for 400 years. They said they were going to do something. They haven't done a thing as far as I'm concerned in re-enfranchising the black man. It's up to the individual to do something, to force the government to give the black man a decent place to live, a decent place to bring his children up in.
Brando was both skilled in his art and a rebel who rebelled against the authorities.
It just simply doesn't apply. And we were the most rapacious, aggressive, destructive, torturing, monstrous people.
Brando never received love and care from his alcoholic mother. Apart from the love and care of his two older sisters, he grew up in an unhappy and restless family environment. He was never encouraged or rewarded for anything by his father, who had the same name as him and was an alcoholic like his mother. On the contrary, he was constantly punished and humiliated. He had an authoritarian and terrible father. He is unloving and unable to understand his child. As with many people, this greatly influenced the development and information of his personality. Brando has an attitude that constantly degrades women. He is undisciplined, grumpy, and doesn't care about society. This general attitude seems to be influenced by his family's mistakes.
If I had fallen into an orphanage, I would have grown up as a healthier individual.
Brando attributes his lifelong lack of commitment for a woman and his selfish attitude that degrades women to childhood traumas. His mother, who abandoned him for a bottle of booze, and Amy, his nanny, who married him even though she was at the center of his soul.
If you don't know what human warmth, love, or affection is like, you can't give it to people. On the other hand, if you have experienced such feelings once and then they were taken away from you, if you feel rejected or abandoned, then you are afraid of experiencing the same loss again.
The sum of these losses is the monster side of all of us. For some, these losses have taken over almost completely. These losses manifest themselves in terrible feelings of possessiveness, arrogance, greed, and envy of others' success. Marlon Brando, who failed miserably in his education and was expelled from every school he attended for indiscipline, says that he always hated schools. For him, he learned almost everything from life, from the positive and negative people he met, the books he read, the places he visited, and the different cultures he met. He says he learned nothing from his teachers, and he beat up a few of them when he was young because he couldn't stand the arrogance of teachers. He swore at many of them. In New York, where he arrived in his 20s, he wandered and vagrancy as a confused young man enjoying freedom. In cosmopolitan New York City, he dealt with angry bus drivers, pacifists, philosophers, weird, ridiculous people, and himself. He read a lot of books, reading poetry even when he left a bar and passed out on a street corner. The more he read, the more he taught. The more he read, the more he taught. He could dominate and complete himself. He devoured Kant, Rousseau, Nietzsche, Locke, Tolstoy, Faulkner, and Dostoevsky. He read Heidegger and Hegel and needed help understanding what they were discussing. He loved Virginia Woolf, Marcel Proust, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He always hated spending time with empty people, and there were a few days when he didn't read. Now that's an intellectual and a true artist. When he was a vagabond in New York, he went to the theater workshop of the new school, and he was undecided whether to go in or not, because he couldn't stand the arrogance of artists. He didn't want to fight and beat them up. His life changed after he entered the door of the theater workshop. There, he met Stella Adler. A giant working at the Moscow Art Theater under Konstantin Stanislavski.
Was I in love with Stella? I don't know. Maybe my first rejection since adolescence tied me to her. It was as if discipline had penetrated her soul, and she was covered with a shield that protected her from her desires. After a while, I got used to it, and I received very disciplined and demanding training from her. She was one of Stanislavski's best students.
Stella Adler brought her knowledge and experience from Moscow to the USA. Brando learned a lot about theater and theater acting from her. His rise to stardom as an actor began with the play A Streetcar Named Desire. Brando showed his incredibly talent in the role of the intensive and rude Stanley Kowalski in the play directed by Elia Kazan, which was later transferred to the cinema.
If I had been loved and cared for differently, I would have been different than I am today. I spent most of my life fearing rejection, abandoning and rejecting people who showed me love, because I couldn't trust them. I never felt what Beethoven wanted to say until I was 40.
Brando also had a beautiful heart, and he cried his eyes out while watching Dances with Wolves. A radical Democrat and anti-colonialist throughout his life, Brando has said many times that he doesn't trust any state, including his own.
I realized that I had to forgive my parents. Otherwise, I would have to spend the rest of my life in the grip of hatred and grief.
Marlon Brando is a beautiful madman who has fiercely opposed capitalism's comfortable life all his life. He is an intellectual who feels responsible for society, the oppressed, and the world. Marlon Brando has been on the side of the oppressed and the people whose rights are violated, and has been their supporter throughout his life. In the 1940s, he defended the people of Israel in response to the inhuman persecution in Hitler's Germany.
أولاد صغار يا عالم أولاد صغار
But in the following years, he reacted loudly to the inhuman treatment and attacks on the Palestinians by the State of Israel. He was aware of the massacres committed by many states against their own people, and he always expressed his support for these people.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Marlon Brando, one of the most prominent supporters of the civil rights movement that began to take shape in the late 1950s and early 1960s, was a few steps away from Martin Luther King when he delivered his famous speech that began with the words, "I have a dream."
This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions.
After civil rights, everyone thought that black people's lives would become more livable, and in many ways they did. They had a little more opportunity than before. But one thing has remained unchanged: the belief that a little black child has in the back of his mind that he cannot realize his hopes, because they continue to be taught, even unconsciously, that they don't have much chance in life as black people.
Brando, who was very sensitive not only about blacks but also about Native Americans, during a conversation with President Kennedy, responded to Kennedy's threatening words. "We know what you have done with the Indians," he replied. "I know what the government hasn't done." He participated in many of the Native American protests. He was arrested in 1964 for participating in a protest against the ban on Native Americans fishing at the mouth of the Puyallup River in Tacoma.
I learned a great deal from a director named Ingmar Bergman.
I think we should say
The winner is Marlon Brando in The Godfather.
Accepting the award for Marlon Brando and The Godfather, Miss Shasheen Littlefeather.
Hello, my name is Sasheen Littlefeather.
In 1973, he was nominated for a Best Actor Oscar for his role in The Godfather. However, he refused the award. Instead, he sent Shasheen Littlefeather, an Apache Indian, to inform him of his refusal.
It is unworthy of my existence to flatter an industry that has systematically misrepresented and vilified the Indians for 60 years with ridiculous westerns, and to participate in such a celebration, when 200 Indians were under siege, at Wounded Knee at that very moment.
In his book, Brando says that he never planned to become a movie star, never aspired to it, and always made fun of the fame that came from it, but he adds that he had to make a living and live his life, stating that he had no particular desire to act and that everything happened on its own. Marlon Brando thanks the great film director Elia Kazan, who greatly influenced him and held his hand. He once told Elia Kazan the following:
I feel like a fraud when I act. I've done everything in life. I've fucked. I've drunk. I've worked. But none of it means anything. When there is so much prejudice, injustice, hatred, hunger, poverty, and suffering in the world. When governments exploit people, making movies seems stupid and irrelevant to me.